We'll be going over stool testing, specifically the GI map, which stands for Gastrointestinal Microbial Assay Plus. It's done by the company Diagnostic Solutions. Who might benefit from this test? What kind of benefits could you get? Is the test valid? Is it accurate? And specifically, I looked at low Roseburia levels. Roseburia is one of the markers the test gives. And it turns out that this specific bacteria is very important for our overall health. So, what does it mean if it's low? And more importantly, how can we fix it if it is low? So, some of the markers that are on this GI map test are various gut, parasite, virus, and fungal levels. And there are other markers that can give us great insight into maldigestion and malabsorption. For example, pancreatic elastase tells us the level of pancreatic enzymes that our body is secreting. Are we able to digest our foods and break it down? And steatocrit is fecal fat. So if you have very high steatocrit, fat that should be absorbed is instead passing into the stool. So this can be a great marker as well to get to some root causes. Inflammatory markers, calprotectin is one of the most well studied and well accepted one that can indicate inflammatory bowel disease. Immune function markers, intestinal integrity markers such as secretory IgA and zonulin. So, who should get this test? Well, when we think about this, GI map, gastrointestinal map, we might think, it's for anyone that has gut issues. And of course, yes, someone with gut issues can benefit from this test. They might get some answers as to potential root causes of why they're suffering from these digestive issues, whether it's gas, bloating, constipation, abdominal pain. Maybe they've been diagnosed with IBS. But because our gut health is so indicative of every area of our health, and the gut is connected to the brain, is connected to the endocrine system. It's all connected. So anyone with hormonal issues, immune system dysfunction, maybe autoimmune disease, maybe they have multiple food sensitivities, even anxiety, depression, more serious neurological conditions like Parkinson's, which actually does have a connection to low Roseburia. Acne, something even like acne, you might be able to get some clues as to why this person is having acne. And there are so many uses for this test that really encompass someone's overall health picture, because they say that disease begins in the gut, and there's a lot of research that would support that. So, is this test valid? That's, a very important question to ask. So, going through PubMed, there was very limited research that specifically showed the accuracy of GI map. There was one study that came up that actually showed GI map in an unfavorable light, but there was some potential bias in that study and errors in methodology. And GIMAP did respond to that study, explaining that essentially the GIMAP is a quantitative test. And in the methodology, they used a test that was not quantitative as the reference standard, which would totally skew the results. So I outlined that a little bit more in the paper. But on the GI Maps, or on Diagnostic Solution website, they explain they are CLIA certified. And CLIA, I believe, stands for Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments. And so before one of the test markers is added to GI map, it does undergo rigorous testing to make sure that it is in acceptable limits. The assay sensitivity, specificity, and variation is tested, and it has to meet a certain standard before it can go on the test. So, for example, the variation is basically looking to see, do we get the same results if the stool sample is tested separate times, different batches of the same stool sample on different days, and the variation amongst these different testings has to be less than 10% to go on this GI map test. And I think CLIA says has to be less than 15%, but on their website on Diagnostic Solutions, it does say that they have theirs less than 10%. So there is also quite a bit of evidence indicating the validity of qPCR testing in general. So not specifically GI map, but the technology, the methodology that's used on this test, qPCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, quantitative polymerase chain reaction, or real-time PCR is another way of saying it. And just as an example, I looked at a meta-analysis to see what the consensus of research says on the accuracy, and they were specifically looking at C. diff, and they found that qPCR testing had between a 90% had a 90% sensitivity and a 96% specificity. So most of the conclusions in these tests that look at the accuracy of qPCR found that there is a high degree of accuracy and that qPCR testing is reliable. So in this paper, I specifically focused on low Roseburia levels. And what does that mean? So, what are some of the symptoms if someone does have low Roseburia? It is highly correlated with constipation because Roseburia promotes gastrointestinal motility. And so, someone with low Roseburia is more likely to suffer from constipation. Also, Roseburia has been correlated to various neurological disease states like Parkinson's disease. It's been associated with different inflammatory diseases like IBD, specifically ulcerative colitis. And and even metabolic syndrome and obesity have been connected to low Roseburia and colorectal cancer. And if we look at what Roseburia does, I mean, it does a couple different things, but one of the main things is that it is a big producer of butyrate, the short chain fatty acid. And butyrate is hugely important for our gut health because it's fuel for the colonocytes. And basically, it's accepted. It's taken up by the colonocytes, and ATP is produced, and also it can serve as a fuel source for the brain. And they think that that's why it can be so connected to some of these neurological conditions as well. And our overall gut health and the inflammation is largely regulated by this bacteria. So Roseburia feeds on resistant starch. It feeds on various types of soluble fibers such as beta-mannan, xylin, and inulin type fructans, and also polyphenols. So it would make sense that if someone with low Roseburia increases their consumption of these foods, that this would be a great place to start to increase their levels. So this would be things like potatoes and bananas have a lot of resistant starch, and rice. And a fun fact is if you, after cooking the potatoes and rice, for example, if you cool them in the refrigerator, then that increases the resistant starch content. And other foods like cognac flour, as I believe how you pronounce it. There's a J in there. I don't know if it's silent. Leeks, garlic, chicory root, and asparagus. These can all increase your Roseburia levels. Another really interesting point to make here is that Roseburia is a hydrogen producing bacteria, and it is inhibited by excess hydrogen. So, that has very important implications because if there's an overgrowth of other hydrogen producing bacteria like Clostridium or Ruminococcus, and there's a lot of hydrogen there in the gut, then that could inhibit the Roseburia from being able to grow. And then the other consideration is that there are bacteria that consume hydrogen, hydrogenotrophic bacteria, M. smithi, D. piger. And if these levels are low, then that could create an excess hydrogen and then a decrease in Roseburia. So ensuring a balance of the gut microbes is very important as they all interact with one another, because as another example of how the different bacterial levels in one bacterial strain can influence another is that Roseburia actually can help bifidobacteria to grow because of certain things and enzymes that it plays a role in regulating. And so low Roseburia could then mean low bifidobacteria. And so, how do we ensure healthy gut microbial levels? Well, avoiding a Western style diet and eating a Mediterranean style diet is a pretty simple but a solid tip to give someone to trying to restore microbial balance. But to kind of bring these points together, there's no like hard set in stone rule. But I would say if someone, could aim to get about 4 servings of different vegetables per day, and I emphasize the word different because I used to be guilty of just eating the same foods over and over again. But if there's anything I learned in this program, it's that diversity of plant-based foods is key to our health. And so also maybe they could aim to get at least 2 servings of fruits per day. And for Roseburia, about 2 servings of resistant starch per day could be really good. Making sure that they're getting foods from the list that contain beta-mannan, xylin, and inulin type fructans. I know I've been really trying to increase like my chicory root teas and leeks and garlic and things of that nature. So there was also a randomized controlled trial that found that when, this group increased their resistant starch and had a high resistant starch diet, their Roseburia levels increased as well. In the control group that didn't have a high resistant starch diet, they did not have elevated Roseburia levels or increase in Roseburia. And then polyphenols are in things like dark chocolate and teas, and of course, fruits and vegetables. And, there was a study that looked at cinnamon and grape pomace extract, which both of these have high polyphenol content. And that, as a matter of fact, did increase Roseburia levels after just 8 weeks. Now, I think this was in mice, so something to keep in mind. But it, based on everything else, it makes sense given that we've seen that polyphenols do increase Roseburia. We also have to remember that the micronutrients also play a role in gut health. We think we have to eat fiber for gut health, but micronutrients like zinc has been shown. If someone is zinc deficient, this was in an animal study though. In an animal study, zinc deficiency led to a disruption in the gut microbiome balance. And also, we know that methylation is really important for microbial balance. And so if someone is folate deficient, then this could therefore down the chain of events affect their gut health as well. And we have to talk about medications like antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors, because if someone is having excessive usage of antibiotics or overuse of these proton pump inhibitors or anything that shuts down the gastric acid and the hydrochloric acid, which can then lead to SIBO and disruption in the gut microbial levels, then this could disrupt Roseburia, of course, as well. I find the topic of a fecal transplant very interesting. And there are cases, I've heard it talked about a lot with C. diff, where that might be the best option for someone. So I would say the takeaway here is that, well, typically we're not just going to look at one bacterial level and, be able to give this conclusive answer on someone's health or disease state with just one isolated bacterial level. There are certain commensal bacteria that the bellwether targets specifically that do indicate our overall gut microbiome health. And so really honing in on these levels to make sure that these are healthy is very important. And a lot of researchers and doctors are believing that Roseburia should be included in this bellwether target category. And again, I think, we can get into all the nitty-gritty details, but if we just take a step back and just think about, what does the body need for health? It needs a diversity of whole foods and plant-based foods. Not to say, don't eat meat, but make sure you've got your plants in your diet. And sleep. Our body needs sleep. This plays a role in our gut health. We need sunlight. We need movement. We need, sufficient water. So all of these things, we have to ensure that we need to be aware of our toxic exposure, because this can impact our microbial health as well. So I know I really enjoyed writing this paper, and I've been even applying a lot of the things I've learned with myself, and really enjoy like learning about all of these things and how to apply them with clients as well. Thank you.